Greetings, clarinetists. As we get closer to starting a new academic year, I've been thinking a lot about studio building. This is such an exciting time for students who are picking up the clarinet for the first time, decided that they want to improve their skills and possibly chair placement, or have an audition they'd like to take or solo they'd like to perform. There are so many opportunities out there to help students along and build a private teaching career. So I sat down with Bley, who has extensive knowledge about studio building and everything that goes into recruiting and maintaining a successful private studio. She talked a lot about things that many don't think about, such as taxes, business zoning, and different aspects of lesson policies. I learned so much from her, and I hope you do as well. Thank you and enjoy. Well, thank you so much for joining me today to kind of talk about the business aspect and the marketing aspect and recruitment of building a private studio, which is something that so many of us, need to do. So I was wondering, I'd like to just take a moment and have you kind of introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about your private studio.
Okay, I'm Bley, and I live in Reston, Virginia, which is in Northern Virginia, just outside of DC. And I have 32 private students a week. I don't do 30-minute lessons, so they're either 45-minute or 60-minute lessons. And I also teach online group lessons as well, which I started during the pandemic, and they've become really, really popular. I think that makes it a way for more people to have access to private lessons that maybe couldn't afford the full price of individual lessons. I also just finished conducting the American Youth Philharmonic Orchestra's clarinet ensemble online all year, which I was kind of thrown into because the normal director didn't want to do an online format. But it was a lot of fun, and we really made some great video performances. So I think the kids learned a lot, I could tell, and it was just a very different way of teaching them than they were used to because obviously we couldn't rehearse together. So everyone had to know their part, and we went around and one at a time had to play with the metronome experience. um, I'm also the principal clarinetist in the Loudon Symphony Orchestra, and I perform with several other local chamber orchestras and symphony orchestras. I'm a Van Doren artist clinician, so I go into middle schools and high schools primarily, some elementary schools, and give clinics and lectures and master classes. And I also teach 4 weeks of summer band camp to clarinet students at the Vienna Band Camp in Northern Virginia. It's the largest band camp in Northern Virginia. And in a normal year, I'll have 150 clarinet students from beginners through ninth grade. So lots of fun things we do in the camp, and it's quite intense, but I love it.
Well, okay, so you absolutely have a huge wealth of knowledge about building a career that kind of looks like that. I think a lot of uh, people are looking to build studios, do a little freelancing, a lot of education. So, kind of moving from, we've been talking a lot in the social media committee about marketing. Let's move just a little bit into kind of how, starting out, how do you advertise, or what are some kinds of advertising that you do? And what do you think about when you're developing that advertising?
I've been very fortunate because the majority of my students come through referrals, either from existing students or band directors. And my personal opinion is that marketing directly to band directors is probably the most important thing you can do. But that being said, band directors are very busy, so you have to choose very carefully how and when you do that. One way of getting into schools that I do is I offer to give clinics or master classes or mock auditions on things like all district band auditions or all state etudes, things like that. And by volunteering my time to do that, then they get to know me and they see me in action, and then they refer students to me because they know that I will do a good.
Good. Sorry, I think it's cutting out just a little bit. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Wonderful. Okay, so what kinds of uh, that kind of brings us into networking. So you spoke about how busy the band directors are. What advice would you give somebody who's maybe just moved to an area and wants to start a studio? What advice do you give them about networking and kind of becoming the go-to clarinet person?
That's tough. I mean, a lot of this takes years to build up a studio. You can't expect to just decide you're going to teach and then have 30 students. It literally took me years to get my name out there, and teaching things like band camps, or being a clinician or an adjudicator are really helpful, because when you have the opportunity to actually work side by side with a band director, like I've often done all district band auditions where I'm sitting with another band director and we're comparing notes between auditions, and then they get to know me and my philosophy and how I teach and what things I look for in students. So really just trying to get yourself in situations where you're with the band directors in a professional setting and being able to demonstrate your skills, but maybe also finding ways of helping the band directors by saving them time, or if there's a piece that they're struggling with for district band festival, can you go in and help the clarinet section with that, things like that.
Okay. And when you make that initial email to connect with the band director, what are some materials that you might send to them to kind of entice them into taking you up on the offer?
I try to keep it short, but I do have a flyer that I came up with that gives some answers to parents that might be considering private lessons but aren't 100% convinced over the advantages that private lessons will give their children. It's not just teaching them clarinet, it's also building their self confidence, teaching them a work ethic, having them work on very detailed tasks over a long period of time, and seeing vast improvement. That does a lot for a student, just above and beyond the basic clarinet skills.
Right, all that transferable skills that music is so good at.
Absolutely. So, trying to point that out and just giving a few little things about what you do. Another thing that I do on a volunteer basis is I grade all of the music for clarinet and clarinet ensembles for the state of Virginia. It's a very long hour type of job with no pay. But the fact that I do that, sometimes, students are looking for solos to play for solo festival and they have to go to that list. So I can introduce some new pieces that way, and maybe say your students might be interested in learning this new repertoire. And I happen to have it in my library. So things like that.
I think especially for some younger, people who just graduated college and they're trying to get on their feet with this kind of stuff. Do you have anything that you would recommend as far as to send or to put out there that demonstrates that they are serious and that they are capable, so that they're not kind of written off?
Definitely, if you can show some kind of track record that you've done with students, maybe give examples of students. For example, I remember one of the band directors referred to me a seventh grade student who could not count at all. He had no sense of timing or rhythm. His cheeks were puffing out. He was really not a good student at all. And she kind of felt badly referring to him to me, but she said, he really, really needs your help. And within just a couple of lessons, we had completely fixed his embouchure. he was able to play higher notes that he hadn't been able to before. And then I started him on a really strict regimen with rhythm and counting, and he made all state in just a couple of years. So, those kinds of things, if you can say that you've helped students achieve these kinds of goals, or, even some challenges that you've had on your own that have helped you learn how to teach students just through your own struggles, that kinds of thing can be helpful to mention.
Okay, great. So it's never too early to get a couple students so that you can start building that
Absolutely. You
track
have to
record.
start somewhere. And personally, I actually started teaching when I was in high school. My private teacher had a full studio, and she started giving some of her advanced students a few referrals. And one of the actually my very first student is still playing today as an adult. So it's really cool. But I also taught in college. I taught at a middle school during college. So that's something that I've always really been passionate about. And I think I've just had a knack for teaching since the beginning. But, it's never too early to get started teaching.
Great. Is there anything else that we should kind of consider as far as recruiting our students that you can think of?
Well, I do think you need to be careful so that other teachers don't view you as a threat in terms of trying to steal or poach their students. That is something that I have never done. And when students come to interview, I always ask, have you had private lessons before, or are you currently taking them? And I won't take them unless their current teacher agrees that it's time for them to transition. I just really want no part of stealing students. That's not the way I do things. So if a student really wants to switch teachers, they need to have their current teacher's blessing, or maybe they've moved from another area, but I still want to check with that former teacher and get some input on the student.
Yeah, that's great advice. Really good advice. I think you want to obviously have a nice connection with the other private studios rather than a war.
Absolutely, because they can be great sources of referrals as well. I have a little group here that I call the Clarinet Lunch Ladies, and they're some of my best friends, but we've been getting together for lunch periodically over when our busy schedules can somehow collide together. But we often get together and talk shop and, compare repertoire and pedagogy, they're also a great source of anxiety reduction, because when we all have those students or parents that are really problematic, and sometimes we need another viewpoint on how to handle a situation. And so it's great to have them as a resource to bounce ideas off of. But we also share referrals. If we have students that we can't accommodate in our schedule, we'll recommend the other teachers in the group.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's really nice. Yeah, I definitely have something like that. Building good relationships rather than competitive ones, I think are
Yes, absolutely.
is important.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, so someone has decided they're going to build their studio. What are some things that they might need to consider that maybe they don't think about before they even start? Maybe they have a student or two, but if they're really going to build one, what are some things they've got to consider?
Well, there's a whole business aspect to running a studio that I think is often overlooked and isn't really taught in undergraduate clarinet studios. So there are many, many things you need to do your homework on. For example, the first one I think that's the most important is, where are you going to teach? Are you going to teach in your home? Are you going to create a studio in your home? Or are you going to teach in a school? Sometimes band directors will have private teachers come in and teach in a classroom after school hours, but that has some complications. I know not every school wants that. So that can be a little sticky situation. Or you might teach in a local music store. Now, if you do that, you don't have as much control over your income because they take a good portion of it. And your schedule is also usually driven by their policies and procedures rather than your own. So, in the ideal world, you teach in your own home studio, but there are many aspects of that that you have to do your homework on, such as I live in Fairfax County and in Reston, and so I had to check with zoning and make sure that my home was zoned to allow a home-based business and that it wouldn't upset my neighbors having traffic coming and going, and just having parking available and things like that. Those are all things you have to check out. I also pay taxes. I have to have a business property tax that I pay on all of my instruments and things that I'm using in my studio. And I never want to do anything under the table. So I don't collect cash payments. All the payments are either by Zelle or by check so that I have good records of them. I declare all of them on my income taxes. I incorporated as an LLC, which was something that my CPA recommended. And you definitely want to have a CPA if you're teaching privately to do your tax preparation, or at least sign off on it if you do it yourself. But if you ever get audited, and my private teacher got audited twice, and she said it was a total nightmare. So you want to do everything you can to avoid that. But I also pay state income tax and federal income tax in addition to the county taxes. So there are lots of things you have to keep track of and make sure you know what all those deadlines are and when all of those things are due. You need to have insurance, liability insurance. So I have an umbrella policy, but I also have a special insurance policy that covers me for teaching issues. Like if a parent were to claim anything against me, I'm protected. But I have a waiting room in my studio, and parents are welcome to wait in here if they want to observe what's happening with their students. I actually know some teachers that film all of their lessons just in case they need to prove anything. So these are all things you have to think about. Banking, don't mix your income from your studio with your personal bank account. You have to have two separate accounts at least, and make sure that any income is going directly into that business account and not into your personal account. I'm trying to think. Music lesson policy. That is tremendously important. And I have spent years refining mine. And every year I change things as situations arise, like COVID. I had to completely change how I was teaching and rewrite a lot of my policy for that. But I think it's really, really important to have a written policy that you provide students and parents before you teach a lesson, so that they understand what your expectations are, what your fees are, and what your cancellation policy is. I think the biggest time sink outside of actually teaching is scheduling, because even though you might have a very fixed schedule and everyone has their own regular day and time for their lesson every week, situations are constantly arising where students need to change lessons to accommodate various things, sports functions, band functions, you name it. So you have to be prepared for that, and you have to have a policy that's clear on how to deal with those things.
Great. Yeah, lesson policies was something when I was very young I did not think about. So that's wonderful advice. I do want to ask something that kind of joins the money aspect of it with the lesson policy. You mentioned fees, and I remember when I first started out, I got a student, and the first question is how much, and I was like, how do you recommend people set their fees?
Well, I think it's important to know what the going rate is in your area. So you can call around and check with the music stores and ask them what they charge for lessons, and then check with other teachers, even on the same instrument or other instruments. And it really depends on your level of education and your experience. I never want to be the most expensive teacher, but I also, oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
I never want to be the most expensive teacher, but at the same time, I've invested a lot into building this studio, and I have tremendous knowledge and expertise in teaching, and I'm not going to give that away. My time is valuable. So you need to do some background research and find out what the going rate is and what you're comfortable charging.
Great. And then real quick to transition that into, all these taxes and things like that. It differs from wherever someone is living. Where
Yes.
do you have any advice where they should start to find out the things that they need to take care of as far as taxes and liability in their area and zoning?
Well, a CPA can be a great source of that information. My CPA was the one that told me to incorporate as an LLC, and he also gave me the information on where to find the zoning information on the Fairfax County website and how to keep track of expenses that could be deducted since I have a home based business. So I would start with a CPA who has experience, preferably with private lesson teachers. I actually belong to a nonprofit called Fairfax Loudon Music Fellowship, which is a group primarily of piano teachers, but there are some of us who are instrumental teachers as well. And we have monthly meetings, and sometimes the meetings are to talk about things like policies or insurance or taxes and things like that. So we all share knowledge with each other. And, many of us use the same CPA for our taxes. So if you can find an organization, also Music Teachers National Association is a good place to start. They have a lot of policy documents there. They have sample music lesson studio policies that you can start with and then sort of tailor to your own needs.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I did not even realize that resource is out there. That's very
Yes.
helpful.
And the local chapter, like here, it's Northern Virginia Music Teachers Association, is another good opportunity to network and find out about policy information.
Okay, great. So let's talk about challenges of the actual teaching that maybe people aren't thinking about. For example, I remember getting a couple of my first students and being like, I don't even know what to get. I don't have enough. I don't have any books or anything. I was so
Yeah.
brand new. Can you talk a little bit about maybe parent challenges and student learning challenges and just the actual teaching?
Sure. So I would say that parents are probably one of the biggest factors that people underestimate having to deal with. And if you choose the wrong parents, they will make your life difficult. I've had parents that have bounced checks, refused to pay, don't show up. Even about 2 weeks ago, I received a referral from a band director, and the parent was all excited. And we set up a lesson, and I sent them a text that morning reminding them about the lesson. And the lesson time came and went, and they didn't show up. And I called them, and the mom said, "Oh, I'm sorry. My daughter's still at a soccer game. I guess I should have called you and told you." That kind of parent is definitely not the one that you want to have. So select your parents and your students really, really carefully. You definitely, if you have the luxury of choosing students, you want to choose families that are very supportive of the whole process and value and appreciate your time and will provide a supportive home environment that encourages practice rather than one that doesn't. I've actually had parents tell their students they weren't allowed to practice at home, they could only practice at school. And obviously, that's unacceptable on many levels. It demonstrates that the parent just doesn't have a vested interest in the success of the student and doesn't really care about the instrument or the student's lessons. If a parent demands frequent scheduling changes, you have to be very careful if you make an exception to your policy, because if you make an exception once, they're going to expect you to do it every time. So my advice is stick to your policy unless it's something like the child is sick or there's a medical emergency or a death in the family or something like that. Obviously, we want to be supportive, but we also have to be firm with our policies, or our time isn't valued, and then we end up losing a lot of income. Because basically, if you're self-employed as a music teacher and there's no lesson, you're not going to get paid. But what I've done over the years is I've changed my policy so that I take all of the lessons in the academic year, say it's 32, and I divide it by the number of months in the lesson year, which is either 9 or 10, depending on what day of the week they have. And then they have a fixed monthly tuition amount every single month. So that way it kind of removes this aspect of, oh, well, Billy only received 3 lessons instead of 5 this month because he had SAT prep, so I'm only going to pay you for those 3. You want to be in control of your income and not put that in the hands of the parents to decide, because this is your business.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah.
Also, making sure that the student is medically fit for lessons. I have occasionally had instances where students had severe medical issues that the parents didn't tell me about up front. Like one student had a severe heart defect, and after I'd been teaching for about 3 months, the parent informed me that their child could drop dead in my studio at any minute. And I mean, that is something that you need to know up front, and you need to know how to handle it. And they hadn't informed me anything about it until they got to know me better. And it was pretty devastating for me to find that out after the fact, and something could have happened that I was completely unprepared for. Thankfully, it didn't. But so in my policy document, I actually have a clause in there that the parent has to sign, stating that they certify that their child is medically fit to take lessons, and that they've checked with a doctor if they have any doubt about that. Because we don't want to be put in the position of having to be the doctor in an emergency. Going along with that, I would also recommend being certified in CPR, which is something that you might not think about, because when you have students alone with you and you're responsible as the adult in the situation, you need to be prepared for anything.
Yeah. So that kind of covers some of the physical things. There's a broad range of other kind of uh, accessibility issues as far as attention,
Yes.
being on the spectrum. What are some
Yes.
things, do you have any advice about being accessible and providing lessons to all students, but understanding how to talk about that and communicate about that?
Yes, and I've actually diagnosed some learning issues in a number of students over the years, and I have a psychiatrist who is a professional at testing learning disabilities, and I've referred a number of students to that psychiatrist. And they've done a whole academic testing workup on the students, and not every parent is really willing to accept that. But one of my undergraduate degrees is in psychology as well, so I have a little bit of experience with that. And to me, it's pretty obvious when a student has a learning issue, but sometimes parents are in denial. So on occasion, I've checked with the band director and said, have you noticed with this particular student? And usually we're on the exact same page. And then the band director can check and see if they have any kind of learning plan in place at the school. And the parents should be disclosing that to me, but they often don't. So sometimes you have to kind of work in tandem with the band director to assess these things and then go to the parent and say, I strongly suspect that your child has this learning issue. I highly recommend that you have them tested. Some parents are receptive and some aren't. And you definitely have to alter lessons in a way that accommodates the student and their own unique learning style. There have been some, though, that I've really tried to teach and nothing I've tried has worked. So I've referred them to other teachers who I think are more capable and qualified in that particular specialty. So I think recognizing when you're not the right teacher is important too.
Yeah, that's actually really important. I think even with students who may not have learning
Yes,
difficulties, just recognizing when it's not a good fit.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, this might seem a little out of the blue, but what's your favorite part about your job and what you do?
Seeing that I can make an immediate impact and seeing how that affects the student. I did have a really cool experience just before I left for vacation, which was 2 weeks ago. A band director approached me out of the blue and said, I'm referring this student to you, and I don't actually currently have any other students at that particular high school. And the band director said, this student has phenomenal technique, but their tone is terrible and they really need help. So I said, okay. And I had a cancellation because another student was away. So I contacted the parents and the student came for a lesson. And, I just had them, I tried to put them at ease as much as possible. And I said, just play something that you've been working on. And so we worked on a rose etude, and immediately I could tell that tongue position was wrong, and the reed strength was way too soft, and the particular mouthpiece they were using was really, I thought, the wrong setup. So I said, would it be okay if we tried something else for your setup? And they said, sure, and I sanitize everything really well. So I put a much harder reed on, a completely different mouthpiece, handed the students' clarinet back to them. And I said, here, give this a try. And then I was constantly, while they were playing, saying, okay, no, you need to change this with your embouchure and this with your tongue position. And their pitch was constantly in flux at first, but then within a couple of minutes, he caught on very quickly. And he went into band class the next day. And then I got an email from the band director saying, wow, I cannot believe the change in just one lesson. So things like that, I just love being able to solve problems like that, and just seeing the student's face when the light bulb went on and it clicked, and then knowing how thrilled they were to get feedback from their band director that they were improved so much in just one lesson. That was just really cool.
Oh,
So
that's wonderful.
I love to be able to do things like that.
You're quite literally opening doors for
Oh
people.
yeah, absolutely.
I love that.
The
So
other
do
thing
you,
that oh, sorry, go
oh
ahead.
no, you go ahead.
The other thing that I really like to do is to introduce students to performing opportunities that they otherwise might not know about, like youth orchestras. And so I just had 3 students audition for a youth orchestra last week, and I don't think any of them would have ever thought to do it, but they had made so much progress during the past year that I felt like they were ready for it. And all 3 of them were accepted, and they're over the moon about the opportunity that they're going to have next year. So that's really rewarding and really fun.
Yeah, it's allowing or fostering skills so that they can have experiences they wouldn't otherwise have.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, that would fill my bucket.
Yes, definitely.
Do you have any last advice, maybe, to give maybe about time management or planning, or, your own limits and boundaries of, how many students you really are willing to take? Because I know I've done math before and been like, if I have 40 students and like what is your advice on, or any last advice that you have about teaching?
Well, I think you need to know your own limits and set them firmly. For example, I'm now scheduling for the next academic year, and everybody's kind of, quibbling over lesson slots and times and everything. And I right now teach 6 days a week, and Saturdays are my one and only day off. And everybody keeps asking me, "Oh, come on, will you please teach me on Saturdays?" No, I'm mentally, I must have that one day off. And then Sundays, I'm already teaching for 7 hours on Sunday. And another student's mom was saying, "Oh, please, can you fit us in on Sundays?" I'm sorry, I'm not good after 7 lessons, I can hang in there and give it everything I've got for 7 lessons, but then I've got to have my own break.
Yeah,
So
that's
knowing
really
that is
important.
really important. One thing that we didn't touch on that I just want to kind of throw in is um, I have a store in my studio, and I don't make money on the things. I just basically pass them through at cost to parents. But just having all of those things here, like it's anything from metronomes and tuners to mouthpieces, reeds, thumb cushions, neck straps, all of that stuff, having the right equipment is so important for the success of the student. And many of the local music stores don't carry what I think are the right products. So by having them here, that's a real service to my parents and my students, that I think sets me apart from other teachers. And yeah, it costs a little bit of money to front those things, but the convenience of having them and the ability to let students try them is so valuable, I think. So that's something that I would recommend that people might not think about.
That's wonderful advice. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about this. I think many people, or most artists, just because of the nature of it, everybody gets to do a little teaching, but it's really nice to speak to someone who has really fostered something wonderful. We're in your location. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.